Yeah, well, Ben, it's an interesting conversation, one that's really, I'd say, honestly, during the course of my coaching career, has kind of traveled that long and winding road. From when I came into the league, the specialists. First of all, there were no long snappers, but the specialists, the kickers and the punters, were frequently position players, and that's where it came from in college as well. So a lot of the good college punters and place kickers also played a position, and then as time evolved, starting with like Gogolak and guys like that, they specialized in kicking, and then you had, some of the punters that specialized in punters. So players like Danny White and Tom Tupa and guys like that who were, very good position players, became Gino Capoletti. That evolved into specialists because of, I would say, the importance of the kicking game and the number of plays that the kicking game and opportunities that it provided. Same thing with returners. There were very few just pure returners. I think one of the long snapping, to me, changed in the mid '80s, and really the key guy in that was Diassi, in my opinion, because Steve was the first center that really truly allowed a spread punt formation against all out rush. Prior to that, teams would generally pull. First of all, there wasn't that many gunners, but when teams started using gunners, they would pull one in and kick away from the free guy on the backside, and that was kind of the idea of the protection. It was not to let the snapper block against a 9-man rush with a split player. So the return team would have one guy on the gunner that split, one guy return. So you had 9 guys rushing against essentially, the punter who wasn't a blocker, the split guy who wasn't a blocker, and the snapper who really wasn't a blocker. So it was 9 on 8, and the idea was to block the most dangerous 8 and let the 9th guy go and punt away from him. And then when the Cowboys went to the spread punt, and then the Cardinals followed that pretty quickly, and they kept 2 gunners split, and the snapper blocked a guy, then that created an 8 on 8 situation, but put a lot of pressure on the snapper to deliver the ball 15 yards deep on the money. And still block a good rusher, offset the A-gap. I mean, we've all seen offensive linemen have trouble making that block on a pass play. And so now you're talking about a deep snap and a block. But as players got better at that, and that skill became more, I would say, players became more efficient at that, then teams decided to carry a long snapper rather than worry about getting a punt block. Plus, there was also the level of consistency and durability with those players. So if you lose a position player who's also a long snapper, you're looking at some real problems. And that evolved into the punters, for the most part, becoming holders because of the amount of time that they could spend with the kickers versus having a wide receiver or a quarterback be the holder, which, again, you don't see very much of that anymore. Assuming the punter is, capable and good enough, has good enough hands to be a holder. And so then that kind of whole unit has really evolved into, a specified snapper, a specified kicker, a specific punter, and generally the punter as the holder, so the 3 of those guys can work together all practice because they're all available. And I know, again, going back to when I first came into the league, you worked on, field goals, and I mean, up to maybe 5 minutes because that was the only time the starting center and the starting receiver or backup quarterback or whatever were available to practice that. So, is it that hard? It's a pretty hard job. Yeah, it's a pretty hard job. It's not as hard as it used to be because you're not allowed to hit the center, especially on field goals, and run them over. And there are some limitations on the punt rush based on what the formation is and so forth. But generally speaking, but still, it's a hard block to. And I think you see most punt rushes attack the snapper. So they loop guys back, so the center thinks he's going right, but then he's come back to the left, or maybe they fake like they're coming back, but they don't come back. So he not only has to snap, and so then that gets into whether you're a blind snapper and you look at the rush and just snap the ball, or whether you're a look back snapper and snap it, and then after the snap you have to look up and recognize what's happened and make the proper block. But again, it's man-to-man blocking. Like, that guy's got to block somebody, or you're a guy short. So it is a hard job, and the accuracy of I would say the place kickers through the years, which has gone up dramatically. Part of that's the surface, part of that's the not kicking outdoors and so forth. Part of it is the operation between the snapper, the holder, and the kicker, which I'd say generally speaking is at a pretty high level, which it should be in the National Football League. So I think if you go back and look at kicks from back when that wasn't the case, you see balls rolling back and the holder coming out of a stance to catch the ball, and the kind of things you see at times in a high school game and that kind of thing. There's just a much higher level of skill, which there should be. But yeah, I think it's a pretty tough position, and nobody knows or cares who the snapper is. It does a bad snap, and all of a sudden that's a front page story. So, there's a decent amount of pressure on that player as well, not just the snap, but also, as I said, to block and punt protection. So, as the roster sizes have increased, it's been a lot easier to carry that player, just like it's a lot easier to carry a true returner. And so, in terms of depth and availability, you really don't want to be looking for one of those players in the middle of any time, in the middle of the game, in the middle of the season. But when you have him as a starting receiver or starting, Luke Rosa, starting tackle, or whoever, those guys, and they're playing, and something happens, not only you lose a player, but you lose a key specialist as well. So. Yeah, it's a great question. There would be so much value in a player that could do a couple of things and save a roster spot. But I would say there are so few of those players available, even to the point where, Amendola did a great job last week. It's so rare that you even see a combination punter and place kicker. Usually it's one or the other, and I think part of that is, at one level it's I'll say relatively easy to put your foot on the ball. But at this level, the difference in kicking mechanics and punting mechanics are so different that it's really hard to be good at both. But if a guy's got a good leg and he's a good athlete, and to make good contact with the ball, there's a point where high school, college, maybe it's good enough. Maybe he's the best guy on the team to do that. But I'd say at this level, that's pretty. That would be asking a lot now. Like Jake can punt, Jake can kick off. Jake can kick field goals. To be at the kind of level you want it to be at, to have the person split their time between the two of those, I think is, a lot to ask. It's not, I'm not saying it's impossible or unheard of, but it's a lot to ask, and so I don't see it very much. That's a good question. It's really interesting, and I'd say if you look at the evolution of those positions over the last, since I've been in the league, but even a little bit before then, because that's really where it started to go, was in the late 60s. Like I think Gogolak, was the first or one of the first where that trend really started to, okay, we're just going to keep a guy and all he does is kick, your Premian, guys like that. That's all they did. It was a little bit unusual, but gradually that's become the new norm.
Thank you, Bill. That was as thorough and in-depth as I had hoped it would be, so thank you.
No, you're welcome, Ben. Thanks for the question.